might pour my tea.
Yeah.
You just see this hand coming through the shop the whole time. Natalie, we'd just like to start by asking you why you think the Greens are doing so well in the polls at the moment.
I think we've got a situation where people are recognising we've got a crisis. We've got four matching crises. They're all interlinked. There's an economic crisis, a social crisis, an environmental crisis and a political crisis. And it's very clear that the whole kind of Thatcherite neoliberal economics that's dominated our debate, that's dominated our way about thinking about society, has really failed. And so people are looking for alternatives. And we're really the only non-business as usual party. And so that's why I think we're attracting a lot of attention.
You and not Ukip?
Certainly not. I mean, I think I was up at the Stand Up to Ukip protest in Doncaster outside their conference, and one of our chants was, you know, Nigel Farage is Maggie Thatcher in disguise, and I think that's, you know, sums it up quite nicely.
Why do you think the Ukip are managing to appeal to working class voters who've often voted for the Labour Party as well then?
I think, you know, a lot of people, and I've met them and heard about them, you know, people who say they're voting Ukip just because they're really fed up and they're angry and they're simply lashing out in the same way as a small child who's a bit overtired and fed up gets angry and lashes out, and that's, you know, understandable. So many people are really struggling, you know, with low wages, with unemployment, with the fact that benefits are inadequate, and so people are feeling really fed up, and it's understandable that, you know, it's an expression of anger.
Okay. And what would you say to those people voting UKIP?
What I'd say is what we want to offer is, you know, a positive alternative. We want to offer a society that works for the common good, in which rich individuals and multinational companies pay their taxes and pay their workers a fair wage, and in which wages are enough to meet people's needs. The minimum wage should be a living wage. If you work full time, you should have enough money to live on. And there should also be decent benefits available to everyone who needs them.
Do you think that you can go it alone on things like taxes or on the wages and still be competitive in a global economy?
I think very much so. We need a different kind of economy. Our current model has hit the buffers. You know, the current model was very much based on cheap fossil fuel, cheap transport costs, emitting the carbon that we can't keep emitting. It was based on low wages in places like China, and it was based on complex global just-in-time supply chains. It's really, you know, it's retracting naturally anyway. But what we need to do is rebuild a different kind of society, because we've seen this based on multinationals, you know, us in Britain just doing finance, just doing services and leaving all the making things and growing things to someone else. That's not working. So what we need is a different kind of economy based on, you know, small businesses, cooperatives, local economy, where the money goes round and round in local economies, creates jobs, creates the opportunities for different kind of businesses. So it's an entirely different kind of model.
Right, okay. Well, let's just move on to the leaders' debates, which is a platform where you could have the chance to say these things. Why simply do you think you should be in the leaders' debates?
Well, I think we should be there both because of the recent election results, the polling results. You know, if you look at the fact that we got 3 MEPs in the European election, got more votes than the Lib Dems, and they got 1 MEP. If you look at the fact that we're polling about level with the Lib Dems at the moment, we've got an MP, we've had an MP since 2010, we're a parliamentary party. About as well as the polling figures and this level of support we've got, and the fact that we've also seen massive growth in membership. We've just passed 25,000, we're about to pass 25,000 members.
Okay. Before we move on to policy then, do you think the SNP on the same basis should be in the leaders' debates?
I think it's a difficult one. You know, I wouldn't be opposed to them being in. What I'm concerned about is whether we're in there, and that's what, you know, we're talking to lawyers and we're talking to the broadcasters, and we will fight tooth and nail to be in there.
And with 6 months to go into the general election, for those who aren't familiar with your platform, what are the 3 things you'd say to them for why they should vote Green?
Well, I would say, you know, what the Green Party stands for is a society that works for the common good, in which everyone has access to the resources for a decent quality of life within the environmental limits of this one planet. And if you look at terms of, you know, specific policy things, we want to make the minimum wage a living wage now and set a target of £10 an hour as a minimum wage by 2020. We want to bring the railways back into public hands, run the railways for the benefit of passengers, not shareholders, and we want to very much protect our NHS, keep it publicly owned and publicly run, and say very loudly and clearly the profit motive has no place in healthcare.
How exactly have the Tories introduced the profit motive into healthcare?
But what we're seeing is we're seeing billions of pounds of NHS contracts are being let to private companies. You know, these are companies that are run for the purpose of actually making money. And if you take, you know, just one example to make it really concrete to understand this, there's been contracts being let for things like aged care. This includes end-of-life care. And you think about that for a second. A company that's making profits providing end-of-life care And there's something very obscene about that. And there's also very strong evidence that it's simply, this is...
We've got a pigeon here.
Okay, I think I'm going to have to stop at this point.
We'll cut and reintroduce it.
That's an interesting outtake.
After the pigeon interruption, before we were interrupted by the pigeon, Natalie was telling us about the privatisation of the NHS. So you're talking about aged care.
Yeah, and so if you think about it, for example, it's a really good example of thinking about, should people be making profits out of that? Absolutely not. And what's more, there's real evidence that that's not the way to organise healthcare. What we simply should be doing is basically following what Professor Alison Pollock has suggested in terms of a bill to reshape the healthcare system and take out the market principles that have been introduced over the past couple of decades, get rid of commissioners and providers, and simply go back to having an NHS that's funded to provide healthcare, not run like a market.
Okay, so let's move to education now, because that's an area where some people have said that academies are a step towards privatisation. People like Andrew Adonis, who introduced the programme, really reject this idea. In his book, he's just creating a new way of doing the comprehensive one, which has been quite successful. Nevertheless, many on the left object to academies. How does the Green Party feel about them?
Yeah, well, the Green Party is very much opposed to free schools and academies. We want to return schools to under local democratic, local authority control. And the fact is, what we've had is a fragmentation of the system, a destruction of any kind of planning for the future. We've got these random schools popping up, often where there's no evidence of great need. We've got a situation where they're often selecting in ways that are actually selecting for pupils who get strong results, often forcing out pupils who aren't getting those kind of results. But it's part of a much broader problem. We say in the Green Party we have to absolutely transform education. At the moment we're treating our young people like sausages in machine. They're being rammed through exam after exam, test after test. Teachers are forced into teaching for the test, and that's a really wrong thing. So as well as saying that we should have zero tuition fees and that education is a public good that should be paid for from general taxation, because really everything from an NVQ to a PhD, that's a benefit to the whole of society, people getting more education. We also say that we need to get away from this exam-focused education back towards a kind of education that looks to give people the skills and abilities they need for a really a decent life.
We spoke to one academy head last week who said that she doesn't really believe there's a dichotomy between exams on the one hand and developing character on the other. She can't really think of a school where you get very good exam results but yet you're not creating people of character. So is this focus on exams, is that misguided?
I think it's putting huge stress on pupils. You look at the levels of mental ill health we have in young people in our society, they're very disturbing.
Your party, does it believe in legalising prostitution?
No, we believe in decriminalising prostitution, which is the New Zealand model, and that basically means that we should ensure that sex workers are able to work safely. And this, I think there's very strong evidence that this is the model that does best to keep vulnerable women and men safe. And there should be very strong rules about safety in those kind of environments. It's worked in New Zealand. There's peer-reviewed studies that show how well it's worked, and that's very much, I believe, the way we should be going.
And just this week, Washington DC and Oregon have become the latest US states to partly legalise marijuana. Do you think that's something that we should do in this country?
I think basically what we're calling for is a royal commission to look at the whole issue of drugs. We say the foundation behind that should be to treat drugs as a health issue, not as a criminal justice issue. The war on drugs has definitively, clearly failed.
To what extent do you think Ed Miliband is offering anything like what he should be offering to the Labour voters?
Well, I think it's Ed Miliband. Yes, I think that it's very disappointing that he's not showing real leadership in terms of the kind of change that people might have expected to come from the Labour Party, and I think that's showing in the polls. And there's not any sense of conviction of what kind of society he wants. And we very much seem to be trapped in a very 90s and noughties model of what do the opinion polls say, and then that's what we're going to say, and that's what so many political leaders are doing at the moment. And we say in the Green Party, we have these principles, this is how society should be run, it should work for the common good, everyone should have access to a decent level of resources. We should be offering benefits, and not offering them grudgingly, but saying we're a humane, decent society, we're not going to leave you to rely on food banks for charity. We offer a model, a different kind of model. where I'm afraid that Ed Miliband is just business as usual.
And what about David Cameron? Is there one thing, any one thing that you'd say he's done well in the last 4 years?
Gay marriage.
Okay. And then anything else?
Well, I mean, to expand on gay marriage, I think he showed some real leadership and some courage in taking on parts of his own party in that. The worst thing, well, there's many worse things, but you know, now we know what Owen Paterson really believes about climate change. The fact that he appointed Owen Paterson as Environment Secretary is really deeply disturbing.
Right. And just moving on to another green issue, civil liberties. When the NSA files came out and the Snowden revelations came out, it felt like there was less of a reaction than the Green Party may have expected and many people on the left expected from the general public. Do you think that's fair? And why do you think people took so little notice of what happened?
I think one of the challenges in this, as you just said, you know, it's the NSA and it's the GCHQ, and there's a whole alphabet soup and there's a whole lot of complex technology here. And there's a real challenge in presenting these issues in ways that are immediately accessible to people who don't necessarily spend most of their time on Facebook and the rest of the time on their PHP database or something. You know, so it's a real challenge to get these issues expressed in ways that are clearly obvious to people. But I think, you know, what we need to do is basically say, you know, human rights, civil liberties, our privacy, you know, these are things that are, you know, if David Cameron talks a lot about British values. I think, you know, Britain has a proud history of defending those kind of values, and we have to make it clear to people that they're under threat now, and we need to stand up for them.
And just finally, last few questions. Nick Clegg, he has been vilified for going into government, but it feels to me like the Lib Dems campaigned as a pressure group and then governed as a party, and inevitably they had to do a few things differently than their manifesto. Do you feel like it's unfair the way he's been criticised for going into government?
I don't think so, because, you know, this is the man who signed the no increase in tuition fees pledge, you know, in a manner that once you've done something like that, there is no going back. And, you know, if we, you know, we find ourselves after the next election or at any point in the future in a similar kind of situation in terms of numbers in Parliament, you know, what we would say is, you know, we're not looking, our first idea isn't a coalition, it's a confidence and supply agreement. So the idea would be that, you know, we would support a stable minority government, but we would reserve the right to report to vote in any issue that we like, to vote according to our conscience, according to our manifesto, according to our principles. And, you know, you sacrifice the ministerial cars, but you get to keep your principles. And I think that's what the Lib Dems did wrong.
How did you come to be leader of the Green Party?
Well, my story, I guess, starts with the fact that on the 1st of January 2006, I joined the Green Party. It was a New Year's resolution green. One of my first degrees, my first degree was agricultural science. And so I had a background in science, which makes me quite unusual in politics. And at that point I looked at the state of the world and said, this is a real worry, I'm going to do something, and I joined the Green Party. But I would never have predicted that I would end up at this point on that day.
And before 2006, when did you move to the UK then?
I moved to the UK in 1999,
right.
Although I lived in Thailand for 5 years before that.
Right.
And my background professionally, I'm a journalist. I worked, since I've been here, I've worked for The Times, The Independent and The Guardian. I finished as editor of The Guardian Weekly, the international edition of The Guardian.
Should there be a cap on immigration?
No.
I think the final question would be...
Actually, it's probably worth expanding on that a little. At the moment, what we've got is, you know, a ridiculous figure. We have, the government has been attempting to put a cap on net immigration. That means that that's the figure of balance of people coming in versus people going out. The government has no control whatsoever over the number of people going out. And it's also counting international students, most of whom go home after their course in the ends. The whole thing is both an intellectual and an intellectual nonsense and, you know, a moral wrong.
But what do you say to the plumber in Rochester or the painter in Hayward and Middleton who looks around and, while maybe he's wrong to think that his area is swamped by immigrants, still feels like there's a real pressure on his wages because other people are willing to work for far less? And
I have huge sympathy with the fact that we've got a low-wage economy, but that's not caused by immigration. No immigrant arrives at the White Cliffs of Dover and goes, I want to work for really lousy wages and be utterly exploited. What we need is a decent minimum wage that's properly enforced.
Do you think Britain's the greatest country in the world?
I can answer this by my actions rather than words. I chose to be British. It wasn't an accident of birth.
Okay, thank you very much. Natalie Bennett.